Hi everyone, it's Emily Leapart here, and I'd like to welcome you to the second annual Canada Day Video Hop. As the host of this event, I'm joined by a dozen of my fellow Canadian YouTubers, and we're featuring a variety of crafty projects featuring products from Canadian stamp manufacturers, artists, and shops. We also have 18 generous sponsors giving away over 40 individual prizes worth over $1,300. Pigment Craft, a new Canadian company that launched only 3 months ago, is one of our generous sponsors, and they sent many of us product to use for this hop. I combined a few products from their collection to create 2 cards. I used the same products in both cards, but they have 2 very different looks. I've linked to all of the products in the description below, and you can also visit my blog for a full visual shop list. Let's take a look at the products I'll be using. The first one is the delicate floral background, which is 4 3/4 inches by 6 1/4 inches. The background has coordinating layering stencils, which are 5 different layers for ink blending this background. My sentiments will come from the Stacked Sentiments Best Ever stamp set. I love the different fonts here, and I love that these are big so they stand out on clean and simple designs. The coordinating dies are my favorite. I absolutely adore word dies that are cut out like this. Let's get started on my projects. I'm going to start by stamping the delicate floral background on Neener Solar White. This is the 80-pound cardstock because it's going to be a panel on my card base. I'm using a black dye ink, and this can be any ink you want. Next, I switched to a craft panel for the second card, and I'm stamping the same background using Catherine Pooler's Daydream ink pad. I'm going to be using the exact same colors on both cards, but you'll see how I can get 2 very different looks using the same products and same ink colors. Now we can move on to the stenciling. As I mentioned earlier, the coordinating delicate floral background layering stencils come with 5 different stencils to add color to different parts of these florals, and the result is absolutely stunning. The stencils don't have to be used in a particular order, but I wanted to go from light to dark based on how I imagined my flowers to look once I chose my color palette. I'm starting with Catching Rays ink and using blender brushes from Catherine Pooler and Studio Katia. I've linked to all of my ink colors and these tools in the supply links below. They're available at several of our sponsors' shops. When I'm ink blending, I always try to protect the edges of the panel, but if you're working on a silicone surface, then you don't have to be so careful, nor would you have to use masking paper or sticky notes. I also ink blend each image from the bottom so that they're shaded as they would appear in nature. After the first layer is done, I switch to Bellini ink. On the second layer, I add more detail to the inner petals. When the second layer is done, I switch to Cabana. This color adds so much depth to the flowers and finishes them nicely. Now it's time to add complementary color to the berries and foliage. First, I'm using Cummerbund, and I was really amazed at how much this ink-blended color looks like my favorite blue Copic markers. To finish up with the last stencil, I used Daydream ink, which is the same color I used to stamp the background on the craft panel of the second card. Most of these colors create what looks like a big mess on the stencils themselves, but the reveal is so satisfying, and the stencils were wiped completely clean with no staining at all. Now I'm going to stencil the background for the second card, and this time I'm starting with white pigment ink because I absolutely love how white on craft looks. For this particular ink, I'm using a Tailored Expressions white brush, and I've used it a lot with white pigment ink, never cleaned it, and it stays soft. Again, you can find this brush at a few of our sponsors' stores by using the links below or visiting my blog. After I finished the white layer, I quickly dried it with my heat tool before adding the next layer of color, since I didn't want the ink contaminating the brush or the ink pads I was using next. This time I'm skipping the yellow because it's too close to the craft and going straight to Bellini for the second layering stencil. The third layer is Cabana, and you can already see how different this background looks from the previous card. For the berries, I'm using Samba, which is my favorite red. Much like Bellini, the Samba has a special place in my heart because it's such a unique color and like no other. It's almost fluorescent and surprises me whenever I use it, much like here. At first, I thought this would be too overpowering, but it turned out to be just right. In fact, I think it would make a fantastic holiday card with a different sentiment. This time, I'm also skipping Cummerbund and going straight to Daydream for the stems and foliage. On this craft panel, all of my ink blending was done with a heavier hand than with the white panel since I wanted to be sure the colors popped against the darker cardstock. Now it's time to work on the sentiments. This time I'm using Neenah heavyweight cardstock of 110 pounds since these sentiments are die cut and need that stiffness. For these stacked sentiments, it's best to die cut and then stamp. I'm so used to stamping and then die cutting that I always have to stop and switch over to this method. For the first card, I'm using the sentiment that reads, "Best Friend Forever." So I've die cut that, and I'm using purple tape to hold it on the panel to make stamping easier. I love that each word is a separate stamp, and if you know me, I love having multicolored sentiments on my cards. I love that I don't even have to mask the different words to get that effect with this stamp set. Going back to the first stenciled panel, I wanted to add some splatter and had considered creating my own splatter from one of the ink pads I used here, namely Daydream. But then I remembered that the Delicate Florals Fillers stamp set had these perfect dot stamps that would give me that same effect. I used the various images from this stamp set to create the splattered look on my background, and I love how it perfectly fills in the spaces between the flowers. I also created some other sentiments that I didn't end up using on my card because I didn't think they looked quite right, but I'll definitely be saving them for future cards. They use the swinking technique where I swipe the ink pad across white cardstock to create my own patterned paper or background. I die cut the sentiment from it and then stamped with the coordinating words. This one uses Bellini, Coral Cabana, and Daydream inks. I white heat embossed Best Ever and used white sparkle puff embossing powder on Day. Looking back at it now on the screen, it looks great, but at the time I felt like there wasn't enough contrast between the two fonts and there was too much Daydream. Now I'm going to assemble the craft card. I cut a 1/8 inch sliver off the panel so it shows a portion of the white base. I used a tape runner to attach the panel to the card base, then used liquid glue to attach a sliver of black cardstock for contrast. I've also cut 2 additional layers for the Best Friend Ever sentiment from black and silver glitter cardstock. I'm using liquid glue to attach the stamped layer onto the black layer, and I'm offsetting these layers to create a shadow. The liquid glue won't stick to the top of the glitter layer, so I use glue dots on the back side of the black layer and attach it to the silver layer, again offsetting it for visual interest. I attached the sentiment to the card with liquid glue, and now this card is done. This gorgeous delicate floral background, layering stencils, and a stacked sentiment makes such a great card in no time at all that any friend would love. Since I was not happy with that first attempt at Best Day Ever, here's my second attempt. This time I've die cut it from black cardstock so my white embossing would really pop and the black cardstock would coordinate with the stamped background. I love the smoothness of the Versamark ink and wow embossing powder on these letters. Have you tried the new Ranger anti-static pouch? I always use one of these before heat embossing, especially now that it's summertime and ultra humid. I've had this Wow Calypso embossing glitter for a while and haven't tried it till now. The color matches Daydream so well, and I thought I would use it to make that center word really pop. It turns out it's quite sheer, so I went back and stamped a white layer on top before adding 2 more layers of Calypso embossing glitter on top. And I love the results. It's so sparkly and beautiful. Now I'm going to attach this onto a second die cut for stability, since I'm going to pop it up with foam tape. I also wanted to use the words "Wishing You," but I didn't want to stamp that directly on the floral panel, nor did I want to use solid cardstock that would completely cover up the background. I settled on using vellum, so I heat embossed the sentiment by stamping it with black pigment ink and clear embossing it. I used black foam tape to add it to the vellum panel, and then I also added 2 layers of the sentiment cut from white cardstock to the back of the vellum panel. I did this because I wanted dimension between the background and the vellum so it looks as if it's floating, but I didn't want it to be as thick as another layer of foam tape. I attached a strip of silver glitter cardstock to the left edge of the card base and attached the background to the card base. Before attaching the vellum sentiment panel, I wanted to cut a fishtail at the bottom. You can freehand this, but I wanted it to be as even as possible, so I used the grid on my cutting mat and an X-Acto knife to indicate where I would make the cuts in the vellum. Once that was done, I used liquid glue to attach the white die cut section onto the background, and now my card is done. I had so much fun creating with these incredible products from Pigment Craft. If you haven't heard of this company, please do go check them out. Pigment Craft is also offering an additional $100 giveaway on Instagram, as well as a gift with purchase, and you're going to love it. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our very generous sponsors who've donated over $1,300 in prizes. If you're new to these companies, please go check them out. You'll love their products and have a wonderful shopping experience. In addition to the giveaways, please look for the list of sponsors who are also offering generous shop discounts with various timelines and discount codes. All of this information is listed on my blog. Thank you for supporting these Canadian businesses that provide us with so much crafty inspiration. Be sure to leave a comment here and then click on the link in the description below to head to the next YouTube video in this hop. The more you comment, the higher your chances of winning. Some giveaways are limited to North American participants, so please indicate your location in your comment. Comments will close at 11:59 Eastern on July 11th, 2021, and the winners will be announced on Saturday, July 17th. Please check back to see if you've won. If you've enjoyed today's video, please click on the subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Be sure to head to my blog for all the details, more photos, and a full supply list. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.